welcome to the LEM Garage. I'm Ed. I'm in charge of parts and service at LEM, and today we're going to show you how to clean more thoroughly the Motorized Tenderizer. Before we actually get started with the cleaning process, we need to go through a little terminology on this unit, and it has to do with the drive and the driven shafts. This is the drive shaft. Tell it's the part that goes into the motor, and this is the driven shaft. It's run by the drive shaft. The knives have to be spaced approximately 1/8 of an inch apart, and you do this by alternating spacers. The drive shaft starts with a single spacer, ends with 2. The driven shaft starts with 2 spacers and ends with 1. Before we actually take the unit apart, I've put together a little assembly sequence that tells you the difference between the drive shaft and the driven shaft and how these units go back together. We'll run through it in a bit on the real thing, but I want you to see it here first. The drive shaft starts with a metal washer, 1 spacer, a knife, 2 spacers, and then you repeat this 2 spacers and knives 13 or 14 times. Finish up with a knife, 2 spacers, metal washer, E-clip, bushing, C-clip, and the rotation of the drive shaft is clockwise, and you'll see that a little bit later, such that this is the cutting edge of the unit. The driven shaft is identical, except it starts off with 2 spacers and ends up with a single spacer, and the rotation is counterclockwise, and the cutting edge again is shown there. And I'll show you this when we're finished. Okay, when we talked about cleaning these units, normally when you're finished with the unit, you simply would put this into warm soapy water and scrub it with a brush, and it comes out looking like this, looks fairly clean, but in fact, if you dig in here a little bit, you'll see meat down in between the knives and the spacers. Periodically, depending on your schedule, you probably should disassemble this unit and clean that area out. Okay, we are going to start with the drive shaft, and we start from the distal end with a little spring here. This C-clip comes off, and these pliers are really valuable for this. They're not necessary, but they help quite a bit. Now the bushing simply slides off, and then we end up with the E-clip, which we pry off with a screwdriver. Yes. And then we start the actual disassembly process. The first washer, and then since this is the drive shaft, it has 2 spacers, and I simply throw those in soapy water. The knife, first knife comes off, soapy water, so forth, so on, until you're finished. Okay, that's the second unit that needs to come apart is the driven shaft. Now, if you're really confident in your assembly and disassembly schematic that we put together, you can take this shaft apart at the same time. If you do that, then you really have to remember which one goes where. For most people, it's easier to do 1 shaft at a time, but the shaft disassembles exactly the same as the driven shaft. It's the C-clip, the bushing, and then the E-clip, and you'll notice that we start with a single washer, single spacer here, and then move down and end up with a double. Okay, after the knives and the washers have soaked in warm soapy water for 15-20 minutes, you can clean those fairly easily with a scrub brush, and then just dry them and we're ready to reassemble. Now this is a shaft, this is a drive shaft with nothing on it. This is what it looks like. Some of your older models, this won't be stainless steel, this will be black, and you may have to clean it up a little bit. But assembly starts by just reversing what we did. We start with a washer for the drive shaft, a single spacer, and then the knife. Now, there's something about the knife that you need to keep in mind, and that's that there is on one edge a little indentation, and you have to line this up with each knife that goes on. If you don't, they won't be even when it's all done. So it doesn't make any difference where you start. So you put that knife on, the little edge is right there, the little dimple. Then you go with 2 more washers, and then 1 more knife, and that little edge has to be up there, and that knife has to be in the same direction. As the first knife. So these two line up perfectly, and away you go. Now that we've got the drive shaft assembled, it's time to assemble the driven shaft. And it's done in the same manner. You put the washer on. This one gets 2 spacers instead of 1 spacer. And then the knife. And again, we need to line up these little notches on these knives. Right? And some of these don't slide on all that easy to begin with. 2 more spacers. And another knife. And I'm looking for the little notch to line them up. And it goes right there on that side like that, and they're lined up perfectly. Now, if you look at the drive shaft and the driven shaft, the drive shaft is going to turn clockwise this way. This will run the driven shaft counterclockwise that way, and the cutting edges are where they belong. Now the finishing touches on the drive shaft. We need to add 2 more spacers, the washer, and the E-clip. Now the E-clip can be a little problematic putting it in, but usually if you start it, put a pair of pliers on it, it will clip in fairly easily. So your entire shaft is put back together. All of these line up exact. You put the copper bushing on, and actually on this year's model, the newer units, these will not be copper, there will be a black composite. And then we need now to put the C-clip on the end, and then we are finished. Again, this little tool works really great for putting that out there, and that's your final finished unit. Now, when you put this back into your unit, remember it's going to turn clockwise. The cutting edge is here, and your finished driven shaft will set in and turn counterclockwise such that cutting edges of both line up. Again, this is Ed. Thank you for joining us on the video today, and look for more videos in the future.